Title: My Undercover Maid. Chapter 1. Adrian Cross reclined in his leather chair, the towering windows of his penthouse office framing the skyline of the city. It was late, the kind of late when even the night owls surrendered to sleep, but Adrian thrived in moments like these. His empire, a vast combination of real estate, technology, and media, was a beast that demanded constant feeding, and Adrian had never been one to let anything slip. Tonight, however, his mind wasn't on stock reports or contracts. It was on the unsettling series of threats that had landed in his inbox over the past month. Warning messages and a single image of his estate's blueprint had left him wary. His security team assured him the mansion was impenetrable, but Adrian had learned long ago that confidence could be a dangerous illusion. At that moment, in a modest apartment across the city, Clara Hayes was preparing for the role of her life. She stood before a mirror, tying her apron over the plain black uniform that marked her new identity. Her reflection stared back, calm and composed, but inside, her pulse raced with anticipation. The agency didn't send just anyone for a mission like this. Adrian Cross wasn't just any man. "Remember the mission," she whispered to herself, brushing a stray curl behind her ear. "You're here to uncover the threat, nothing more." The drive to the Cross mansion was uneventful, but Clara's eyes took in every detail: the winding road that led through the wooded estate, the discreet security cameras hidden in the stone gates, the armed guard who waved her through with a brief nod. It was a fortress, just as the briefing described. The mansion appeared before her, all glass and steel, its modern design clashing with the wild, untamed nature surrounding it. A butler greeted her at the door with a polite but indifferent expression. "This way, Miss Hayes," he said, leading her through the house. Clara followed, her eyes moving across the space, cataloging exits, cameras, and blind spots. Everything was spotless, luxurious, and yet there was a coldness to that hinted the absence of warmth or family. Adrian Cross lived alone, and the silence of the house was almost oppressive. When they reached the grand kitchen, the butler gestured for her to wait. "Mr. Cross will see you shortly," he said before disappearing down the hallway. Clara busied herself with unpacking her small bag, arranging the cleaning supplies she'd brought for appearances. The clang of her tools echoed in the empty kitchen, but it didn't mask the sound of approaching footsteps. She straightened as Adrian Cross entered the room. He was taller than she expected, with a commanding presence. His tailored suit hinted at his wealth, but it was his eyes that held her attention. They were sharp, observant, as if he could see straight through her. "You must be the new maid," he said. Clara shook her head, keeping her expression neutral. "Yes, Mr. Cross. Clara Hayes." Adrian studied her for a moment. "You've worked in households like this before?" "Yes, sir," Clara replied, keeping her answers short and professional. She'd rehearsed her backstory a dozen times. "I've worked for several high-profile families. I'm very discreet." "Good," Adrian said. "You'll find that discretion is non-negotiable here." "I understand, sir." He nodded and turned, walking to the large window. "This house has rules, Miss Hayes. You'll be briefed on them by the butler, but let me make one thing clear. You're here to work, not to pry. Is that understood?" Clara's lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. If only he knew. "Perfectly, sir." Adrian dismissed her with a wave of his hand, already engrossed in the tablet he'd picked up from the counter. Clara left the kitchen. The man was guarded, almost to a fault. It would make her job harder, but also more interesting. She'd expected arrogance, perhaps even entitlement, but Adrian Cross was different. Later that evening, as Clara cleaned one of the guest bedrooms, she found herself alone. She took the opportunity to scan the room for anything unusual. Her fingers brushed over the ornate bedpost, the smooth surface hiding a micro-camera she discreetly placed there. The agency's orders were clear: observe, record, and identify the source of the threats. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was more than it seemed. A soft creak from the hallway snapped her out of her thoughts. Clara turned, but there was no one there. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered. Her first day in the Cross mansion wasn't over yet, but Clara knew one thing for sure: this was no ordinary assignment. Chapter 2. Clara moved through the hallways of the Cross mansion, her heart beating in rhythm with her cautious footsteps. Adrian Cross had left earlier in the evening, heading to an undisclosed meeting, leaving Clara alone with the mansion. Her mission was clear: find clues to identify the source of the threats Adrian had received. The place was spotless, yet it felt cold, devoid of any warmth. It reflected Adrian's personality, perfectly calculated and impossible to read. Clara entered Adrian's office, the door creaking slightly as she pushed it open. She paused, holding her breath, then slipped inside. The room smelled of leather and expensive perfume. A massive desk sat in the center, papers meticulously arranged, and a laptop secured with biometric locks. Nothing out of the ordinary, Clara murmured, but her instincts said otherwise. She ran her gloved fingers along the bookshelf, tapping each surface for hidden compartments. Her fingers stopped at a slight groove between two books. She pressed down, and a hidden panel clicked open. Inside was a flash drive, neatly tucked away. What secrets did Adrian feel the need to hide here? She slipped the drive into her pocket, intending to examine its contents later. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps came from the hallway. Clara froze. Adrian wasn't supposed to return until morning. Could it be one of his security guards? Or worse, someone else? She quickly hid behind the heavy curtains, peeking out just enough to see a tall, shadowy figure enter the office. It wasn't Adrian, but the man headed straight for the desk. He wore a black hoodie, and his face was covered. The intruder began searching through the desk drawers, cursing under his breath when he found them locked. Her instincts screamed for her to act, but her cover as a maid wouldn't explain her presence here. The man pulled out a crowbar from his backpack and tried to open the desk. Clara's hands itched to grab the vase nearby and knock him out, but she needed to know more about his intentions. "Come on," the man muttered, finally breaking the lock. He searched through the drawers, pulling out a folder marked confidential. Clara's eyes caught glimpses of documents, schematics, financial reports, and something labeled Project Tempest. Whatever Adrian was involved in, it was far more dangerous than she'd imagined. The intruder snapped the folder shut and stuffed it into his backpack. Just as he turned to leave, Clara's foot shifted slightly, causing the curtain to rustle. The man froze. "Who's there?" he barked. Clara held her breath, praying the shadows concealed her. The man took a step toward the window, his hand reaching into his pocket. Was it a gun? A knife? Before he could act, the sound of a car engine roared outside, followed by the crunch of gravel. Adrian was back. The intruder bolted, slipping out of the office through the side door. Clara exhaled, stepping out from behind the curtains. Who was that man, and what was Project Tempest? The front door opened, and Adrian's voice rang through the mansion. Clara quickly straightened the room, hiding any trace of her intrusion. She grabbed a feather duster from a nearby table and pretended to clean as Adrian entered the office. His gaze landed on her immediately. "What are you doing here?" Clara forced a polite smile. "Just tidying up, Mr. Cross." "This room is off-limits to staff," he said. "I apologize," Clara said, lowering her gaze. "I wasn't aware." He studied her for a moment. "You may go now." Clara nodded and hurried out. She had a flash drive in her pocket, a mysterious folder on her mind, and a powerful man who was becoming harder to figure out. Chapter 3. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Cross mansion. Clara moved swiftly through the dining room, though her mind was far from calm. The flash drive she had taken from Adrian's office was hidden beneath her mattress, its secrets waiting to be uncovered. Adrian sat at the head of the dining table reading the morning paper. Clara set his coffee before him. "Thank you," Adrian said. "You're welcome, Mr. Cross," Clara replied. As she turned to leave, Adrian's voice stopped her. "Did you hear anything unusual last night?" Clara froze for a fraction of a second before turning back to face him. "Unusual? No, sir. Should I have?" Adrian's eyes locked onto hers. "There was an intruder," he said, leaning back in his chair. "They broke into my office." "That's terrible," she said, forcing genuine concern into her voice. "Did they take anything?" "Nothing of value," Adrian replied, though the slight twitch of his jaw suggested otherwise. "But it's concerning. I've tightened security. From now on, no one goes near my office without my explicit permission. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," Clara said, bowing her head slightly. She turned and walked away. That evening, Clara sat cross-legged on her bed in the small staff quarters, the flash drive in her hand. She had waited until the mansion was quiet, the staff asleep, and Adrian locked away in his wing. Plugging the drive into her laptop, she held her breath as the files opened. The screen flooded with information, encrypted blueprints for something labeled Project Tempest. Clara clicked through the documents. It wasn't just Adrian's business empire at stake. This was something far darker. The schematics detailed a high-tech weapon capable of causing widespread destruction. "Who are you, Adrian Cross?" Clara whispered. One file caught her attention, a photograph. She gasped as she recognized several prominent figures, politicians, CEOs, even law enforcement officials. Adrian wasn't just wealthy, he was deeply entrenched in a web of power and corruption. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on her door, making her jump. She quickly closed her laptop, hiding the flash drive under her pillow. "Clara," it was Adrian's voice. She took a deep breath, smoothing her hair as she opened the door. "Yes, Mr. Cross?" Adrian stood in the hallway. "Come with me." Clara nodded, stepping into the corridor. He led her through the mansion. They stopped in front of his office. Adrian opened the door, gesturing for her to enter. Clara stepped inside. The room was as pristine as ever. "Sit," Adrian said, pointing to the chair opposite his desk. Clara obeyed. Did he know about the flash drive? Adrian sat down. "I don't like games, Clara. And I don't like secrets." "I don't understand," she began, but he cut her off. "You're not who you say you are," Adrian said. "I ran a background check. Your references don't exist. Your employment history is fabricated. So, tell me, Clara, who sent you?" She had been careful. How had he uncovered the truth? "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. Adrian leaned forward. "I've dealt with spies, agents, and infiltrators before. You're good, but not good enough. So I'll ask you one last time, who sent you?" Lying was no longer an option. She had to turn the tables. "Maybe I should be asking you the same question," she said. "Who are you, Adrian Cross? And what is Project Tempest?" Adrian smiled, and for a moment, Clara thought she had pushed too far. But then he leaned back. "Interesting," he said softly. "Very interesting." The game had shifted, and Clara knew she was walking a razor's edge. Chapter 4. As she left his office that night, Clara knew she had crossed a line. Adrian had seen through her, but she had managed to plant a seed of doubt in his mind as well. It was a dangerous game, and every move was a gamble. Back in her room, Clara locked the door and opened her laptop. She needed answers fast. The deeper she dug, the more horrifying the truth became. Project Tempest wasn't just a weapon, it was a plan to destabilize entire nations. Adrian Cross wasn't just a businessman, he was orchestrating chaos on a global scale. She stared at the screen. How could she stop him? And who could she trust? The next morning, Clara resumed her duties as if nothing had happened. The mansion buzzed with activity, the staff unaware of the storm beneath their feet. Audrey carried on as if their confrontation had never occurred. But Clara could feel his eyes on her. Midway through the day, Clara found herself in the library, dusting the endless rows of books. She was alone, or so she thought, until a low voice startled her. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish." She spun around to find a man leaning casually against the doorframe. He was tall, with dark eyes. "Who are you?" Clara asked. The man said, "The question is, who are you? And why are you meddling in things you don't understand?" "I don't know what you're talking about," said Clara. "Save it," the man said, stepping closer. "Adrian may not have figured you out yet, but I have. You're not just a maid. You're after something." Was he one of Adrian's men? Or was he someone else entirely? "Let's just say I have my reasons," Clara said cautiously. "Who are you working for?" The man's smile faded, replaced by a serious expression. "I'm here to stop him," he said, nodding toward the ceiling where Adrian's office is. "Adrian Cross is a monster, and if you're smart, you'll stay out of his way." Clara folded her arms. "And let him carry out Project Tempest?" "I don't think so." "You know about Tempest?" replied the man. "I know enough," Clara said. "And I know it has to be stopped." The man studied her for a moment before nodding. "Then we're on the same side. For now." "Who are you?" Clara asked again. "Call me Ethan," he said. "And if you want to survive, you'll follow my lead." That night, Clara met Ethan in the garden under the cover of darkness. He laid out a plan risky, but their only chance to expose Adrian and destroy Project Tempest. "We need evidence," Ethan said. "Hard evidence that ties him to the project. Without it, he'll slip through our fingers." "I already have some," Clara admitted. "But it's not enough. The files are only part of the puzzle." Ethan nodded. "Then we'll get the rest. But we'll have to move fast. Adrian's not the type to leave loose ends." The next day, Clara and Ethan began their operation. Clara continued her duties, using her position to gather information, while Ethan worked from the shadows, evading Adrian's security. But Adrian wasn't idle. He had tightened his grip on the mansion. Clara felt the noose tightening around her neck, but she refused to back down. Late one night, Clara sneaked into Adrian's office, once more searching for the final piece of the puzzle. She found a hidden safe, its lock sophisticated but not impenetrable. With Ethan's guidance over a hidden earpiece, she cracked the code and opened it. Inside, she found a folder labeled Tempest Operations. Her hands shook as she flipped through the documents. This was it, the proof they needed. But as she stuffed the folder into her bag, the office door creaked open. Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat. Adrian stood in the doorway with a cold expression. "I knew you couldn't resist," he said, stepping into the room. "You're clever, Clara," Adrian said. "But you've made a mistake. And now you'll pay for it." As Adrian stepped closer, Clara reached for the hidden knife strapped to her leg. This wasn't over, not yet. Chapter 5. Clara's heart thundered as Adrian stepped forward. She tightened her grip on the hidden knife strapped to her leg, bracing for his next move. But instead of attacking, Adrian pressed a small, inconspicuous button on the bookshelf behind her. A low mechanical hummed as a hidden compartment slid open, revealing a secret room lined with documents, photographs, and monitors. Surprised, Adrian asked. "What is this?" Clara demanded, trying to piece together what she was seeing. "This," Adrian said, gesturing to the array of evidence, "is what they don't want you to find. Powerful people, politicians, moguls, and those who thrive in the shadows have been trying to frame me. Project Tempest is their creation, not mine. I've been playing along, trying to gather enough proof to clear my name." Clara's instincts screamed not to trust him. "Why should I believe you? You've been hiding this all along. Because I had no choice. They have eyes everywhere. I couldn't risk tipping them off. But now you've stumbled into the middle of it. Clara, you've seen enough to know something's wrong. If I were guilty, why would I leave all this lying around? Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out the flash drive she had stolen from his office. What about this? Is this part of your plan? Adrian took the drive, inserted it into a nearby computer, and scanned the files. This isn't mine, he said firmly. These files were planted. Clara, someone's been manipulating you. Before Clara could respond, the sound of car engines and heavy boots echoed outside the mansion. Adrian's eyes snapped to the monitors, which now displayed footage of armed government agents swarming the property. They're here, Adrian muttered. Clara barely had time to react before the door to the study burst open. Agents flooded the room, their weapons trained on Adrian. Adrian Cross, one of them barked, holding up a warrant. You're under arrest for crimes against the state, including conspiracy and terrorism. Adrian raised his hands. You're making a mistake. The agents ignored him, cuffing his hands behind his back. As they began to lead him away, Adrian turned to Clara, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity. Clara, he said, you know the truth now. They've won this round, but the fight isn't over. Only you can expose what's really happening. Don't let them win. Clara nodded. Was he telling the truth? After the agents left with Adrian, Clara stood frozen in the now silent study. The flash drive felt like a burning weight in her pocket. A familiar voice broke her reverie. Well, that was quite the show. Clara turned to see Ethan leaning casually against the doorframe. Ethan, Clara said, her voice shaking. You were in on this, weren't you? Ethan chuckled, stepping closer. Come on, Clara. You didn't really think you were the only one playing spy, did you? Adrian's little sob story, his so-called innocence? It's all part of the game. Game? Clara snapped. This isn't a game. You've set him up, and for what? Money? Power? Ethan's smirk faltered, replaced by a steely glare. Careful, Clara. You've already seen how far I'm willing to go. You can take the payout and walk away, or you can end up like Adrian, just another scapegoat. Clara stepped closer. You're wrong. I won't back down. I'm going to expose you and everyone involved in this. You can't silence me. Ethan's smile returned. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts won't save you. Watch your back, Clara. You're playing with fire. As Ethan walked away, Clara clenched her fists. She wasn't just in this fight for Adrian anymore, she was in it for the truth. But the storm was only beginning, and Clara knew the real danger was still ahead. From the shadows, a figure watched her, unseen but not unnoticed. Clara could feel their gaze. Someone else was pulling the strings, and she was now at the center of a deadly web. Chapter 6. Clara sat inside a coffee shop, her laptop open and her fingers trembling as she scrolled through the files she had retrieved from Adrian's hidden room. Every document, every photograph was like a piece of a complex puzzle, but the picture they formed was still incomplete. Her instincts screamed at her to leave the city, but she couldn't. Adrian's last words echoed in her mind. Only you can expose what's really happening. She closed the laptop and pocketed the flash drive. As she stepped outside, Clara didn't notice the dark car parked a block away, its occupants watching her every move. The next morning, Clara visited Adrian in the high-security prison where he was being held. The environment made her uneasy, but the determination in her heart kept her steady. Adrian was brought into the visiting room, his hands cuffed and his face drawn. When their eyes met, Clara saw a hint of hope. You came, Adrian said. I've been digging, Clara replied, keeping her voice low. The flash drive had files linking Project Tempest to a man named Gregory Shaw, a senator with ties to several shady organizations. But it's not enough. We need more. Adrian leaned forward, his eyes scanning the guards nearby. Shaw's just a pawn. There's a bigger player pulling the strings, someone who's been orchestrating this for years. If they think you're onto them, they'll come for you. They already have, Clara admitted. She pulled down her sleeve to reveal a faint bruise on her wrist. Someone tried to corner me last night. I barely got away. Adrian's jaw tightened. Ethan, he muttered. He won't stop until you're silenced. Be careful, Clara. And whatever you do, don't trust anyone. Clara nodded. I'll find the truth, Adrian. I promise. As Clara left the prison, she needed access to Shaw's private records, but breaking into a senator's office was a death wish. Later that night, while poring over the files again in her small apartment, Clara noticed something she had missed before, a receipt for a private storage facility rented under Shaw's alias. This could be the break she needed. Before she could act on it, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. You're in over your head, Clara, Ethan's voice said on the other end. Stop digging. You won't like what you find. Go to hell, Ethan, Clara snapped, hanging up. But her hands trembled as she locked the door and peered through the blinds. The next day, Clara made her way to the storage facility. She had disguised herself, wearing a dark hoodie and sunglasses. She slipped inside, bypassing the security cameras. Inside the unit, she found boxes of documents, flash drives, and even surveillance photos of Adrian and herself. As she sifted through the evidence, she stumbled upon a blueprint labeled Phase 2, Project Tempest. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed outside. Clara's breath caught. She ducked behind a stack of boxes just as the door creaked open. Two men entered, speaking in hushed tones. Ethan wants everything burned, one of them said. No traces left behind. Clara watched them pour gasoline over the files. She needed to act fast. Grabbing the blueprint and a few key documents, she slipped out through a back exit, narrowly avoiding detection. Back at her apartment, Clara scanned the blueprint and realized the horrifying scope of Project Tempest. It wasn't just a political scheme, it was a bioweapon designed to destabilize entire nations. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text, "You're running out of time. Walk away." Clara ignored it, her mind racing. She knew she needed to confront Ethan, but she also needed a plan. The next evening, Clara attended a high-profile gala where Ethan was scheduled to speak. She disguised herself again, blending into the crowd. Ethan took the stage with his polished smile and confidence. She slipped into his office during his speech, planting a hidden camera and retrieving a file from his desk. But as she turned to leave, Ethan was standing in the doorway. "You just couldn't let it go, could you?" he said, stepping closer. "I'm not afraid of you," Clara replied. Ethan smirked. "You should be." Suddenly, the sound of gunfire erupted in the distance. Clara used the chaos to slip away. She had what she needed, but she knew the battle was far from over. Clara returned to her apartment, only to find it ransacked. She realized the flash drive was missing, but she still had the blueprint. Clara sat in her apartment, piecing together the evidence while Ethan watched her through a hidden camera he had planted, his smile growing. Chapter 6. Clara stared at the scattered documents on her desk, frustration bubbling under the surface. Despite everything she'd risked to retrieve them, the puzzle was still incomplete. Each piece pointed to one critical location, Senator Shaw's office. Her gut twisted at the thought of breaking into the senator's heavily guarded office. Shaw wasn't just any politician, he was one of the most powerful men in the country, with layers of security protecting his secrets. But Clara had no choice. Adrian's name, her own safety, and the fate of countless lives hung in the balance. The night was moonless, the perfect cover for Clara's mission. Dressed in black and armed with the tools, she scaled the exterior of Shaw's building. The senator's office was on the top floor, its windows protected by laser grids and motion detectors. Clara bypassed the alarms. Once inside, she moved quickly. Her flashlight illuminated rows of filing cabinets and a large desk. It was there, hidden beneath a false bottom in a drawer, that she found it, the final piece, a detailed blueprint of Project Tempest. Her breath hitched as she scanned the file. The bioweapon wasn't just a theory, it was real, a virus engineered to spread rapidly, sowing chaos and fear. Shaw and his associates had already mass-produced the antidote, ready to rake in billions when the outbreak began. Clara's horror deepened as she realized Adrian's role in their plan. They had framed him because they needed his state-of-the-art lab to replicate the virus, but when he refused, they eliminated him as an obstacle. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden sound of footsteps in the corridor. They knew she was there. The door burst open, and a flood of armed men poured in, guns raised. Clara dove behind the desk as bullets shattered the air around her. Grabbing the file, she rolled out of the way and sprinted toward the window. She pressed a button on her belt, activating a small explosive that disabled the laser grid. Without hesitation, she smashed through the glass, the wind howling around her as she plunged toward the ground. Her grappling hook fired just in time, latching onto a ledge and breaking her fall. Clara landed hard, her knees buckling, but she didn't stop. Behind her, Shaw's men gave chase, their shouts echoing in the night. The streets became a deadly maze as Clara darted through alleys and climbed over fences, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Hours later, battered and exhausted, Clara reached what she thought was a safe haven, her agency's headquarters. She had hoped they would provide protection and resources to expose Shaw's conspiracy. But as she stepped into the conference room, Ethan was there, leaning casually against the table, a smug grin on his face. Beside him stood Senator Shaw and several armed guards. "Clara," Ethan said smoothly. "You've been very busy." Clara wanted to run, but the guards blocked her escape. "You can't trust your own agency," she spat, glaring at Ethan. "Oh, we've been involved from the start," Ethan replied, circling her like a predator. "The agency has too much to gain from Project Tempest's success." Shaw stepped forward. "Hand over the files, Clara. You've lost." Clara clenched her fists, defiance flaring in her chest. "Over my dead body." "Easily arranged," Ethan said, motioning to the guards. They lunged at her, but Clara was ready. She fought fiercely, disarming one of the men, and used his weapon to create a momentary opening. She dashed toward the door, bullets whizzing past her. As she ran, a guard caught up with her, grabbing her arm and slamming her into the wall. Pain exploded in her ribs, but Clara gritted her teeth and kneed him in the groin, slipping free. She made it to the exit, only to find Ethan waiting for her. "You can't win this, Clara," he taunted. "Just give up." But Clara wasn't done yet. She feigned surrender, handing over the flash drive she had in her pocket. As Ethan smirked in victory, she activated a hidden button on the drive. The room filled with smoke as the device emitted a blinding flash, disorienting everyone. Clara used the chaos to escape, slipping out into the night. Hours later, Clara hid in a secluded motel, her body aching from the fight. She pulled out the real flash drive, which she had hidden in her boot. Despite the pain and exhaustion, she allowed herself a small smile. They thought they had won, but Clara was far from defeated. The files she had stolen would expose Shaw, Ethan, and their entire operation. All she needed now was a way to release them without getting herself killed. As Clara plotted her next move, Shaw and Ethan were planning their next attack, vowing to silence Clara for good. Chapter 7. Clara sat on the edge of her bed back at her apartment for a quick and quiet visit, her face illuminated by the faint glow of her laptop. She stared directly at the hidden camera in the corner of the room. She had known it was there all along. Ethan was watching, no doubt gloating, believing she was oblivious. But this time, she'd turn his surveillance against him. Her plan was simple but bold: play along, feed them just enough information to lead them astray, and simultaneously dismantle their operation piece by piece. The first step was to bait Ethan. Clara deliberately staged a phone call, pretending to have located another piece of evidence tying Adrian to the virus. "It's locked in the safe house on Redwater Lane," she said loudly. "I'm heading there now." As expected, it worked. Within minutes, a convoy of Ethan's men raced to the fake location, leaving Shaw vulnerable. With Ethan distracted, Clara shifted her focus to the senator. The man's political empire was vast, but no one was untouchable. She'd secured just enough information from her stolen files to launch her attack: his off-the-books financial dealings, shady contracts, and his connection to Project Tempest. All she needed was to expose him in a way that would send shockwaves through the public. Clara infiltrated a high-profile gala where Senator Shaw was a keynote speaker. She wore a disguise, slipping into the event as a server. The room was filled with elites, each one oblivious to the ticking time bomb that was Clara. She'd managed to plant a listening device under Shaw's table earlier in the day. Now, hidden in the shadows, she patched the feed into the ballroom's audio system. The room fell silent as Shaw's voice boomed over the speakers, not his speech, but a private recording Clara had obtained. "You really think I care about lives? The virus is just business. We create the problem, then sell the solution. Billions, Ethan. Billions." Gasps rippled through the crowd as Shaw's voice continued. "Adrian was just a tool, and when he refused, we took him down. People like him are expendable." Shaw's face turned pale as the audience turned on him, their murmurs rising to an uproar. The senator's security scrambled to shut the audio off, but Clara was already one step ahead. From a nearby balcony, she hacked into the building's screens, projecting damning footage of Shaw and Ethan discussing their plans over drinks. The visuals were clear, the audio even clearer. The crowd erupted into chaos. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and Shaw was swarmed by enraged attendees demanding answers. Clara smiled as she watched from above. But her satisfaction was short-lived. Shaw's private guards spotted her, and the chase began. Clara darted through the hallways, her heart pounding as the guards closed in. She turned a corner, only to find herself face-to-face with one of them. The man swung at her, but Clara ducked, driving her elbow into his ribs and disarming him with a swift motion. She grabbed his radio and heard a chilling command from Ethan: "Bring her in alive. I want to deal with her myself." The fight escalated as more guards joined the pursuit. Clara was cornered in the parking lot, her back pressed against a concrete wall. Her breath came in ragged gasps, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. "Give it up, Clara," one of the guards sneered. "You're out of options." But Clara wasn't done. She reached into her pocket and triggered a small smoke bomb, the area filling with thick gray clouds. Using the cover, she slipped away, stealing a motorcycle and disappearing into the night. Clara changed into a different disguise and made her way to the prison where Adrian was being held. She had managed to secure a brief visit under the pretense of being a lawyer. Adrian's face lit up with a mix of relief and determination as Clara sat across from him. "Shaw is done," Clara whispered, sliding a folded piece of paper toward him. "The evidence is out. His career is over, and his connections are falling apart." Adrian's eyes gleamed with hope. "That's one down. What about Ethan?" "I'm working on it," Clara replied. "But I need you to hang in there a little longer. I'll clear your name." Before she could say more, the sound of commotion outside the room made her freeze. "They're here for you." Clara nodded. "I know." Ethan's men were waiting for her as she exited the prison. They wasted no time, surrounding her and demanding the evidence. Clara feigned compliance, handing over a flash drive she had deliberately planted with fake data. As they gloated, She slipped a small GPS tracker onto one of their vehicles, knowing it would lead her to Ethan's next move. The guards weren't fooled for long. "This isn't real," one of them shouted, but Clara was already on the move. A brutal fight ensued in the parking lot. Clara took hit after hit, her body screaming in pain, but she refused to give up. She outmaneuvered her attackers, using the terrain to her advantage, and finally escaped. By morning, Senator Shaw was a national disgrace. The media was relentless, and his face was plastered across every screen, his crimes laid bare for the world to see. Clara watched the news from her hideout, satisfaction showing across her bruised face. She picked up her phone and sent a single message to Ethan. "One down. You're next." Ethan smashed a glass in anger, vowing to destroy Clara before she could take him down. Chapter 8. Clara's body ached from the countless bruises and injuries she'd endured. Ethan was the final piece, and she wasn't going to stop until he was taken down. Sitting in her hideout, she dialed his private number, the phone pressed tightly against her ear. "Clara," Ethan answered with mock amusement. "You've been quite the thorn in my side." "Funny," Clara replied. "I was just about to say the same thing." "It's over, Ethan. Shaw's finished, and you're next. You should have quit while you were ahead." Ethan chuckled. "Over? You've barely scratched the surface, sweetheart. I've already covered my tracks. Do you think one rogue agent can bring me down?" "You sound nervous," Clara taunted. "You should be." The line went dead. Clara took a deep breath, sliding her gun into its holster and adjusting her combat gear. She wasn't walking away from this, not until Ethan paid for everything. Ethan's organization was hidden inside an industrial complex on the outskirts of the city. Clara studied the perimeter from a nearby rooftop. She caused a massive diversion by setting off small explosives near the building's eastern entrance. The alarms blared, and guards scrambled to the scene, leaving the western side vulnerable. Clara slipped inside, navigating the corridors. Her heart pounded as she dodged patrols, taking down a few guards silently. The facility was a fortress, and every step brought her closer to Ethan and closer to danger. Clara reached the heart of the complex, a massive control room buzzing with monitors and equipment. Ethan stood at the center, a smug smile plastered across his face. "You're predictable, Clara," Ethan said, spreading his arms. "But I have to admit, I didn't think you'd make it this far. You framed Adrian, ruined lives, and planned to unleash a virus on the world," Clara spat. "This ends now." Ethan's smile faded as he motioned for his guards to attack. Clara fought fiercely, but the numbers overwhelmed her. A blow to her ribs sent her crashing into a table, her vision blurring. Blood trickled down her face. With a roar, she grabbed a metal rod and fought her way to Ethan. The guards were down, leaving just Clara and Ethan. He removed his jacket, rolling up his sleeves. "You've been a nuisance, Clara, but this ends here." The two squared off, circling each other. Ethan's punches were brutal, and Clara struggled to keep up, her exhaustion slowing her reflexes. He slammed her into a wall, his fist connecting with her stomach. "Stay down," he growled. Clara coughed, blood splattering the floor. "Not a chance," she gasped. Summoning the last of her strength, she noticed a loose pipe above Ethan's head. She baited him into lunging at her, then sidestepped, using her weight to push him into the pipe. It cracked, releasing a burst of steam that scalded his face. Ethan screamed, stumbling backward. Clara seized the moment, delivering a blow that sent him crashing to the ground. The sound of sirens filled the air as police stormed the complex. Clara collapsed to the floor, her body battered and broken. Officers surrounded her, calling for medics. When she woke up days later, the hospital room was quiet, sunlight streaming through the window. Her entire body ached, but the sight of Adrian sitting by her bedside made her forget the pain. "You're awake," he said softly, his eyes filled with relief. Clara smiled weakly. "Looks like I'm not dead yet." Adrian chuckled, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I heard everything. You took down Shaw, exposed Ethan, and destroyed Project Tempest. You're incredible." "I couldn't have done it without you," Clara whispered. Adrian leaned closer, his eyes locking with hers. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you. But one thing's for sure, I'm never letting you out of my sight." Before Clara could respond, Adrian leaned in, pressing a tender kiss to her lips. The news was flooded with reports of the dismantling of Ethan's organization, the destruction of the bioweapons, and Adrian's exoneration. Clara's name wasn't mentioned, per her request. She preferred to remain in the shadows, knowing the world was safer because of her actions. As she rested in Adrian's arms, she allowed herself a rare moment of peace. The fight was over, and for once, she felt like she could breathe. "I'm proud of you," Adrian murmured. Clara closed her eyes, a faint smile on her lips. "I'm just glad it's over." Adrian held her tighter. "Yeah, me too." The story ends with Clara and Adrian looking out of the hospital window, a new chapter of their lives just beginning.